Mark, I'm going to start off today's Heat and Light podcast with a question for you. And what I want to know is, what do you remember about fourth grade history class?
Wow, quite some time ago. I mean, I think the thing that when I think about those old school classes I had is the textbooks that came, and with history especially, I don't know what these textbooks would look like today, but these sort of incredible paintings of like ancient lands, ancient parts of the world that I'd never been to.
The reason I ask, and just for me, my fourth grade, I had a teacher named Mr. Miller, and he always wore a sweatshirt from the Penn Can Speedway. And you could tell that, I think that was kind of his number one interest when, a great teacher though, great guy. But that was the last time that I learned in any sort of school about ancient Egypt. That was it. We did pyramids, you build them out of clay at your desk, and you learn they throw in a little bit about ancient Sumer and Mesopotamia and all this stuff, and they also blended it in with Greek and Roman history, and then bang, all the mysteries of the universe, and then you're on to fifth grade, and that's it. And when I got back from vacation a couple weeks ago, I know that you had been urging me to watch this documentary called The Pyramid Code, which is a great 5-part series on Netflix. So I encourage anybody that is interested in this kind of stuff to just give it a shot. But I was shattered when I watched this, because you go back and we're taught, okay, these are just tombs for great people. They force these people to push these big heavy blocks, but they could do it, and we could do it now if we wanted to, but we just don't want to. On to the next thing. Totally false. Like that could not be further from the truth. And I think both of us really sort of were left a little messed up by the situation. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we were planning to do this show last week, or even earlier this week, and I am more baffled and confused than when I went in, because you're so right. The initial images you have, and I remember back to those fourth grade texts, was essentially these slaves carting these massive ton bricks up and down hills. But the more you learn about these pyramids, where they're positioned along the River Nile in Egypt, along what's called the Band of Peace, the pattern they form, the fact that one of them is so high up on a mountain that you could never have asked human beings to cart those size stones up those hills to create that northernmost pyramid. Now, overall, there are 22 of pyramids. I used to think, there's just a couple in Egypt, 3 or 4 in the Sphinx. There is a very precisely laid out group of 22 pyramids along the Nile River. In theory, people thought these were built around 2500 BC. But actually, everything that this show points out and makes so clear is that they were built thousands and thousands of years prior to that, which essentially completely blows up our timeline of human history and completely blows up what's described to us as children.
And what I love about the whole thing, too, is that, and just by the way, just be warned, this can send you down YouTube wormholes that you did not think were humanly possible. You can come out the other side a little uneasy about yourself. You can really, and this maybe is 3 or 4 shows down the line, but really slammed me into kind of a head-on collision with Antarctica, freaked me out a little bit about what's going on there. Don't know how I ended up there. But the best part about all this is the government's over there basically shut everything down. You can't look at anything. You're not allowed to go in there anymore. People kind of started to get a whiff of maybe, this isn't how it's taught in textbooks. And now everything is sort of just blacklisted. You can't go anywhere. You can't do anything. So in that spirit, this week's Heat and Light, next week's Heat and Light, the double episode that we've been talking about, centered around the pyramids. We're going to do it kind of in 4 acts, but, really just try to wrap our heads around a little bit about what we learned from the documentary and get some of you guys talking and, hearing some of the stuff that you guys think. But Mark, I'll start with you. I know when we both finished, we both kind of had a few major takeaways, but I think the one from you that I thought was most interesting is the main thing that we've all been told, right? How these things are built, totally untrue.
Absolutely. And I think part of it is the point that's made in this documentary is that we have been fitting Egypt, really kind of forcing Egypt into our lens of how we see the world. Oh, it's a nice part of history. They were built, like you said, we could still do it today if we wanted to. We just don't want to. Completely nonsensical way to view things. We need to view these pyramids with completely open and new eyes. Let's start with this rather stunning fact that the pyramids stand exactly at the center of the largest landmass on the planet. If you were to go east, west, north, south, they are at the absolute mapped out center. And nobody alive at that time, according to the way that we view humanity back then, had any knowledge of the world, the larger world they lived in, to create that kind of coincidence. It begins there, and then as you just drill down into the actual construction of these temples, that inside there are wall paintings showing really like beyond modern engineers making precise calculations and cuts. There is inscriptions and paintings of things that look exactly like airplanes and helicopters and flying objects. And the actual carvings inside some of these temples, there are exact, perfectly round cut stones with holes drilled throughout. And people have to ask, why are these drillings there? What is happening inside these pyramids? We've always were told that these were simply tombs for leaders, for kings. And when they went into Egypt and talked to the deepest, longest historical sources, people tied to these projects from so long ago, that was the first thing they said, that there is literally no proof that these were tombs on any level, that's absolutely not what they were, leaving us to ask, what were they? Why were they there?
I love and one of my favorite parts about the documentary is when they go over and this is to your point, when they say you can't even fit a credit card between these blocks. They're still
thousands of years later. Exactly.
Thousands of years later. I mean, if you look at, I'm taking a look around my neighborhood. There were houses built in 1989 that are falling down, you know, and these people have somehow figured out a way, and not only to build these so that you can't fit a credit card in between them, but encase them in different materials. So maybe it's limestone underneath, and then it's something else to act as sort of like an insulator on the top of this. And I just go back to, like, I'm thinking about these guys and men and women who are super brilliant, right? And they're ahead of the curve, and then us, like, thousands of years later, just like smashing our fat fingers into our iPad and being like, all they did was stare at the sun all day. No, I mean, this is like totally insane stuff.
It really is. And I do think that there is an unmistakable link to the cosmos, in the sense that if you look at the way that the pyramids, especially the ones in Giza where the Sphinx lies as well, that they are mapped out almost exactly to fit up in the stars, the constellation Orion. Orion has that 3-starred belt. Why? It
totally blows up the theory that, well, I mean, for one, I mean, you could never imagine, it sort of blows up two cross-current theories, right? That people evolve, right, so that we're bigger and stronger than they ever were. So if 5,000 years ago, these people are devolved to the point where maybe the tallest person is like 5'2" and 130 pounds, no matter how many of them you get together, you can't drag like a 6-ton block of limestone like a mile up this pyramid. And I think that's what's so interesting about it. I mean, had to have been some sort of machinery. There had to have been all this other stuff. And I think what really got me in the documentary was that they sort of kept edging it towards the bigger picture, which is maybe we're not the smartest ones. Maybe there was something else back then that was way bigger than us. And think about it. They had all of the natural elements. They had everything at their disposal. They're not running out of stuff like we are now. I mean, there could have been stuff in the ground that we don't even know about back then, that they had at their disposal, but they left these very clear sort of pictures to say, like, hey, almost to say, hey, please don't put us in a textbook making us look like idiots that we're building giant graves for people. Like this is totally not what's happening.
Right. They talk about there being completely enigmatic chemical burns inside the pyramids, that some of the measurements and the calculations were things that we can't achieve today in terms of construction. So I completely agree that the idea that we constantly downgrade anyone who came before us. We do that with old people that we see around town and on the street. Oh, obviously they're not vital anymore. But we do it even much more so with past civilizations, assuming that they, barely could speak or write. Everything we know about Egypt shows us completely an opposite picture. My thing is, how is this human? How is what we've seen human? Because I know, Connor, the thing that you were into also is what is potentially happening inside of these pyramids and why they're constructed the way they were.
I think the quote that really, I wrote it down while I was watching the documentary, and it was, I think one of the pyramids, at least somebody had some video, at least inside, before they were kind of shut down and you couldn't really go inside to tour them anymore. And I think it was an engineer that said, I don't know exactly what these things are for, but I know that I sure as hell wouldn't have wanted been standing inside of it when it was working properly. And, what they kind of went on to say was that essentially these were power generators, right? That these were massive structures, and there was sort of this water that was pooled underneath the pyramids because back then it was built right on the River Nile, which has sort of drifted, I think, about 6 miles now, they said, since the pyramids are technically dated or said to have been around. But so essentially, you look at all these different tools, all these different chutes and pipes, and you could totally see and we'll post, if we can, sort of the diagram of what this looks like, but essentially a massive power generator. And there are people that were touring Egypt, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that would stand on top of these things and talk about an electrical current that they felt sort of running through their bodies, like a natural electrical current. And as it turns out, I think that they might have been the people who really harnessed natural electricity, which is, that's what's all around us. We all have the power to do that, but unfortunately that has to be monetized and we have to pay for it.
And we're told that, electricity was discovered by Ben Franklin running around in a men's suit flying a kite. And I think that honestly, this stuff happened in a much different time in history, because you're right. When they went through the construction of the pyramids and they start to show that these ornately chiseled tunnels and chutes and holes and rounded stones really create what they called to be a sophisticated sort of harmonic structure, that each of the pyramids would offer different versions of this harmonic structure, that they would use them as healing centers because they would match up almost perfectly with the energy, the harmonic energy that we feel inside of us as human beings, that they could create wellness and wipe out disease using some of this stuff. So, again, we mock these groups of people as being a primitive, much less, sophisticated version of us. It seems completely the opposite. They did much more with what was around them. I just simply cannot wrap my head around the human experience of it, because it's not just in Egypt. We're talking about the ones that are in Egypt, but you find these pyramids and these temples in Central and South America, in Mexico, and there's one I believe they said was in Turkey. They're all over the continents. And this is a time when, in theory, you'd have to spend your entire life getting from one continent to the next. There wasn't a time of global expansion where everyone was doing the same thing at the same time. And so how do these pyramids, these duplicate structures and ideas and concepts go around the entire world, leaving us only to believe that, oh no, that's just coincidental? That feels like a very dim final analysis.
It leaves me, though, almost understanding a little bit more about where we are as a society, that it is totally an American thing to do, to show up 7,000 years after electricity is invented and just be like, yeah, I did this, right now, everybody look at what I just did, from flying a kite in the rain with a key on it, and meanwhile, these people are rolling over in their graves like, we built pyramids, pyramids that generated power for continents, not just just for 2 or 3 people or something like that. But it really does say a lot about, where we're from. And what I really loved, and this is sort of, this is where the wormhole factor sort of comes into it, because the documentary talked about, Nikola Tesla and the ability to harness natural electricity, and how he was shut down by J.P. Morgan, who, was the namesake of the giant bank back then, because he couldn't monetize it, and they wanted to monetize electricity. As it turns out, I was reading some really interesting articles from the early 1900s about J.P. Morgan's insane interest in Egypt. And I think that, back then, when sort of the artifacting and anthropology was so new, how much of this information was just ransacked and thrown away so we don't get mad that we're paying for electricity? How much of this is stuff that we don't know because they figured out how to make 2 or 3 of these pyramids that could supply power for entire, halves of a continent?
Absolutely. And they talk about, during the second Iraq war, when we went in and raided the museum there in Iraq, that what was taken out of there, for instance, were thousands of ancient artifacts. Why? Not something that's ostensibly valuable, but just taken away, taken out of there, almost as if that was the goal. That was the reason, one of the reasons we went in there. And the Egyptian pyramids have been dealt a very similar fate, where I think when people were allowed to kind of roam and maraud them, that a lot of stuff was taken out. And all you need to know right now is, as you said before, that there's a government clampdown on the pyramids. There is no interest in sharing knowledge or really kind of having an open conversation about the mysteries that lie there with regular people. It's completely locked down. And if this is so primitive, why can we not figure out what the pyramids were about? That's the first hint to me that it is something so far beyond us that we're probably, as a people, just scared to confront the idea that could completely shift what we think about the earth and our human reality.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a perfect way to leave it. And it's going to take us millions of years to comprehend, and it's going to take us 2 episodes to
that should do it. 2 episodes should wrap up this.
Two micro podcast episodes on the Bumpers platform to explain all the mysteries of the world. But it's been fun. I think it's been fun today. I think just to at least get sort of a baseline view of some of our earlier takeaways. But next week, we're going to get into the broader questions, right? I mean, this, electricity and engineering are sort of the really the ground floor of this. And we will end on a positive note. Happy 75th birthday to Jerry Garcia, who is a person who would be totally on board with us questioning this. A guy who played in front of the pyramids in Egypt back in the day before he left us. So I think that's a good way as any to leave it. And next week, we'll be back with part 2 of the pyramid episode. Please let us know if you have any thoughts, if you have any theories. I mean, this is sort of a passion project for us, just something that we love to do and love to talk about. So we also love to hear from you guys about it as well.
Yep, and if you have not already, you can find us on Twitter at Heat and Light Pod, and we'll get a little more interactive with that. I think that we've been a little remiss. But we have another big double episode coming up right after this double episode on August 8th and 9th. Very special stuff there, and some real Los Angeles lore, if you want a hint. So we will be back in a couple days. Connor, try to hang in there until we meet again.
Farewell.
Farewell.